The way I talk. We're jumping right into this. Get ready with me because that's the way my last couple have gone because I forget to film an intro once I finish my makeup. Anyway, the way I talk, it has been a thing for as long as I can remember, and it remains the subject of much consternation. So let's talk about the way I talk. I get a lot of comments about this here on the YouTube. First off, I was born in Brooklyn, and my parents moved my brother and I out to Queens when I was still mad young, so I don't remember the Brooklyn years at all. I left home at 17, but my New York accent has never fully left me, especially when I'm turned up. So there is that, but what most people are on about is my way of speaking. Syntax, vocabulary, that sort of thing. My family is/was middle class, lower middle class in retrospect, but my mom and dad worked really hard to make sure that we always had everything we needed and even a little bit extra too. So I never felt the struggles that they undoubtedly faced. It was only when I went off to college, my first and only experience attending private school, that I gained a bit more clarity on what our socioeconomic standing really was. When I met other kids in my dorm and in classes who were actually middle class as opposed to lower middle class, and I was like, oh, I'm poor. Not really. As I said, I'm extremely fortunate because I've always had enough food to eat, clothes to wear, a warm bed to sleep in, every single day of my life, and that is a privilege. I'm just driving at the fact that my parents, my mom especially, did an incredible job of putting me in positions for me to have every possible advantage that I could, despite our socioeconomic standing and our means or lack thereof as a family. My mom and dad saw to it. Now, I don't remember ever not knowing how to read and write. My mom taught me to read at such a young age that I deadass have no memories predating literacy. Plus, my parents never talked to me with baby talk. They have always spoken to me the way they do now that I'm grown. My mom was also the PTA president at my brother's school, and she eventually went on to become a teacher there after my brother and I had graduated, because that would have been really weird. So teaching is clearly a part of my mom's nature, and that benefited me gaining literacy pretty much as soon as I was able. So with my mom being PTA president, I would spend a lot of time with my mom at the school while my brother was in first and second grade, and I hadn't started school yet. He's a couple years older than me. And I absolutely loved it. I loved school before I started school. Some of my absolute fondest memories of my childhood and perhaps my life are from wandering around the school and popping into the different classrooms. I would go around to all the different classes and basically audit them. It was a pretty small school, but I felt like it was my own playground in a way. I remember I used to like to take the spelling test in Miss Gray's class. She taught second grade, and she eventually was my second grade teacher. But preschool age T, I used to take the spelling test every single week. I think she did them on Fridays. It was always 10 words per test, 10 points per word. I would take it every single week, and I used to get 100 on it every time, and it made me so excited. That was such positive reinforcement to get me excited for school once I would be going for real, until one day, one fateful day, when I got a 90. I think I misspelled the word neighborhood, but whatever it was, I cried and I cried and I cried. Whew, and now I'm crying just from tightlining. I must have been 3 years old at the time, because I remember vividly another time in some other classroom. One of the older kids asked me how old I was when I was just sitting in their class hanging out, and I lied and I said I was 4. Like, I lied up because I wanted this older kid who probably was like 5 or 6 to think I was cool, and I didn't want her to think I was just some stupid baby. That was a gigantic tangent to say that writing and reading has been a massive part of my life since very early on. thanks to my mom teaching me so young, which led to me being just a straight up bookworm my entire school life until college. I always loved reading, and even though I didn't always read the assigned texts in high school because I just didn't want to, because some of them just straight up looked boring, I was always reading something. That is until college, when I traded books for beer. It was during college that my dumbing began, but that's another story for another day. Anyway, I went to public schools my entire life, excluding college. And again, my mother saw to it that I went to the best public schools possible, just to give me a fighting chance at making it in this world. I don't know what strings she pulled to get me into some of the schools that I went to, but when I've spoken about the disparate consequences that disadvantaged Black mothers have faced, simply trying to get their children enrolled in public schools, and I say disparate because I'm thinking of the Felicity Huffmans and Lori Loughlin's of the world, those stories of the Black mothers are extremely upsetting to me. I've never asked my mom if she had to use a friend's address or do anything illegal to be able to get me into good schools. But the thought of her putting herself at risk just so that I could have a chance, just so I could have the chances that I've had. I'm just gonna stop there because I'm not fitting to cry on YouTube today or any other day. Matter of fact, let me go do lashes, BRB. Long story made less long. I had an excellent education through New York City public schools, and getting to those schools involves some pretty considerable commutes just to get to and fro every day. But by being put into these schools and classrooms and gifted programs, I was thrust into environments where wasn't it only that I was the only Black girl, but I was often the only Black person. For many of my childhood years, the only times I got to be around other Black girls my age was typically when I was with family and maybe in dance class or other extracurricular stuff. Because even though there were a couple other Black girls in my middle school, for example, I was in the nerd classes. So I was segregated out within my grade to be with the other nerds. Sorry for this lighting, by the way, guys, but the sun has pretty much set on me and I'm using artificial lighting and it looks like shit. Anyway, I was segregated out as a token Black nerd in these nerd classes. And frankly, it should come as no surprise that I was nearly always a token in these classes. There are countless other little Black girls and boys who didn't enjoy the privilege that I did of having a mom who, by whatever means necessary, gave me so many legs up in life. A mom who had relationships and workarounds that helped me get into good schools and good programs at those schools. Now that I look back, I can see that my mom routinely opened doors and opportunities for me that I wouldn't have had opened for me without her forcing them open. And that tended to lead to a lot of isolation once I was actually in these environments. My entire life having to fit into these schools and classrooms for the gifted kids, that really translated into me having to fit into very white, privileged spaces, even though these were public schools. The fact that these were public schools shows just how deep redlining and keeping disadvantaged communities disadvantaged goes. So I have been in predominantly white schools and institutions my entire life and school careers. A lot of Chads and Mackenzies and Logans. Therefore, without knowing what I was doing, nor having the vocabulary to describe it, code switching became a part of my survival. In my opinion, code switching, to at least some extent, is a part of survival for any Black person. Code switching takes many forms, and I think the movie Get Out explores the dynamic behind code switching so well, but the pressure that Black people feel to make white people feel comfortable around us when we are allowed into or accepted into their spaces, it's a trip. I read a review of Get Out back when it was first out or relatively new to theaters, and I wish I could remember who to credit for saying this, but it referred to really distilling Black people's fear of white people's fear of Black people. That is my life in a nutshell. even now that I make videos where I talk about these kinds of issues on YouTube, a lot of my real life friends, my non-black friends, are just like, oh, I had no idea you were going through these kinds of things. And I'm like, yeah. That's because we are more concerned often with making y'all feel more comfortable. And instead, we just take a let's not speak of the unpleasantness approach when we're experiencing insane oppression and discrimination. There are so many layers to the experience of being a token, and it's still something that I wrestle with today. I have even clocked some Black people who eventually learn, I guess, or at least seem to prefer being the token, as if by doing so they hope that that will prevent white people from noticing that they too are Black. You know, just like, oh, I hope none of these white people notice I'm actually Black. And this is coming from someone who does have a lot of white and otherwise non-Black friends as a result of my school and professional environments being positively alabaster. The experience of being Black in America is not something that can be explained to someone who does not share it. I know that to some people, code switching is a signifier of fraudulence. You know, so-and-so is just putting on a Black scent. I can only speak for myself, but at all times, however I'm expressing myself, whether it's MLA or Ave, it is authentic to me and my identity. It's just different facets of me, of my mind, and the way that I think and then communicate ideas. It's like Spanglish. In my formative years, it's not even something that I necessarily could have been fully aware of or could have comprehended. I just knew that there were rarely any other Black girls in my classrooms, and then when I did talk to the other Black girls in school, they'd usually say that I talk white or think I'm white. And what a depressing appraisal of Black people and Blackness, by the way. To have such a narrow view of Blackness and to try to strip another of her Blackness because it doesn't align with your vision of Blackness. Because what you're saying is that eloquence equates with whiteness, and even more damning, that it cannot equate with Blackness. High school was a lot better. There were a handful of other Black girls in my grade. All of my best friends from high school were fellow Black girls who were ostracized and mocked by other Black girls, sometimes boys, and I think we were all just so relieved to have finally found each other. Those feelings of not belonging and of isolation really bonded us to one another. And it was so comforting to finally feel accepted. I mean, Black girls and women are shit on so much already as it is. It made me whole to have friends who could empathize with those feelings of being cast out by your own. The high school that I went to is what's called a specialized high school, and you apply to get into it. It's a whole thing in New York, specialized high schools, and it's a lot like applying to college, honestly. My high school constantly reminded us that they're considered to be a pretty big deal. I suppose if there were an Ivy League of New York public high schools, they would certainly be at the top of the list, and probably still pretty close to the top if you factored in private schools. So attending that school set me up to get into a great college, as well as to get scholarships so that I could actually afford to attend that great college. And none of this, and I mean none of it, happens without all of the hustling that my mom and dad did in the 13 years leading up to me going to high school. None of these opportunities happen without everything my parents did for me, like driving me to a middle school that was 3 towns over every morning. So my friends in high school all had similar stories. We were the Black girls who were told that we weren't Black enough by all the other Black girls our entire lives. But once I came out here for college, my life more or less went back to what it was like before high school all over again. The college I went to was extremely, extremely white. I'm sure it still is. And when you're in these kinds of very, very, very white spaces, you find yourself, whether you're aware of it or not, whether you want to or not, behaving in ways so that you are seen as one of the good Blacks. And in this case, where we are trying to be seen as good, the bar of entry is often just the erasure of anything stereotypically or even just generally characteristically Black. Up, but true. This goes from straightening our hair to the way we alter our speech. As a kid, I remember whenever my mom or aunt or whoever would answer the phone, they would use their telephone voice because you never knew who was calling, and back then we didn't have no caller ID. So you could say that for many of us, telephone voice eventually became cleaved to at least a part of our identity so that we could be accepted into and thrive in spaces that are designed to exclude us. It's like in that movie, I think it's called Sorry to Bother You with Lakeith Stanfield. On this floor, we use white voice at all times. I feel that I am both sides of the code. The way that I talk is an outgrowth of loving books as a kid and from having to adapt to the white world for so long and not sound ghetto, but I do feel that it's just as authentic to me as when I'm in situations where my word choice gets a whole lot more trenchant. And to this day, when other Black people say things like, "You talk so proper," I am fucking triggered. It's just a reminder that to so many people, I will never fully fit in. I am forever an outsider. So the key for me was realizing that I just had to stop letting other people define my Blackness. People who complain about me using big words or who think that it's elitist to have a varied vocabulary are not of concern to me. There are people who are evidently triggered by the fact that I'm self-assured and that I'm more than good with who I am and the way that I talk. Not too long ago, I had one individual in the comments who was talking about she wanted to punch my lights out. And then when I responded to her, she deleted her entire channel. Ma'am, if you are watching, let's do a meetup. I'd love to see you try your best. Anyway, as with all troll comments, these people who place all sorts of assumptions on me and my character based on word choice, they're using me to project their own issues. Their issues with me ain't even about me. Unfortunately, there are people who somehow make my vocabulary, my self-confidence about them. Or more accurately, my confidence, which is how I feel about me, somehow becomes an attack on their self-esteem. It makes no sense. As far as me using a lot of big words, what's really happening is my entire life, I've just always really taken delight in learning a great new word. Words are not pay-gated. They're available to all of us. So if I happen to use a word that maybe you don't hear every day, that's not valid justification to insult me. Leave me alone. Get out of my comments. Ever since I was a kid, every word learned just became another tool in my communication. The English language often gets shit on for being an ugly language. This even came up in a live stream recently. English is so often derided as utilitarian, just a language that isn't beautiful like the Romance languages. But I don't believe that at all. I think English can be just as beautiful as any other language. And I have to remind myself of this daily, since it seems like there's not a single person on the internet who knows how to use a fucking apostrophe correctly. It actually makes me want to die several times a day. I'm a writer. That is my profession, which means words are my business. People literally pay me for them. My entire career is the pursuit of communicating information and ideas effectively. And being a writer is the only thing that I have ever wanted to be, as long as I can remember. Well, when I was very young, I used to say I want to be an author because I didn't know the word writer yet. But since day zero, that's the only job I ever wanted to do. And a very long time ago, I had to stop letting other people's issues with highfalutin words, I had to just not let that affect me any longer, because it is pretty much always about that person's baggage about Black people, and often Black women in particular. I don't necessarily sound the way people expect me to sound when they first lay eyes on me. There are expectations of who I am, what I'm like, or really who I should be and what I should be like before I ever open my mouth, before I even walk into a room. Mackenzie and Logan get to be Mackenzie and Logan. When people see a black woman, when they see a black girl, when they see me, they already have a preconceived notion, a fully formed image of who I am based on their perception of this monolithic image of black women and black girls. Black people are not given the benefit of individuality. Each black person is expected to speak for all black people. Each black person is expected to represent all black people. So how dare I not conform to those expectations, to that monolithic image of the black woman? Well, I do dare. I do. And those complaining about me using $3 words can stay pressed because my rate is $5 a word and up. So with that, it is time for me to get out of here. Special shout out and thanks to all of you. And there are many of you who have complimented me on my speech and say that I'm very eloquent. That's always very lovely for me to hear because, as I said, being able to communicate effectively is very important to me. And for all the rest who have made bizarre accusations about me and my character because of the way that I speak, I already said what I said. Thank you all for listening. Hopefully this explains a bit about who I am and why I am the way that I am. And I officially got nothing else. So thank you so much for watching. Special thanks as always to my Patreon family. And before I go, I will leave you with one gentle reminder. Never trust anyone with a Morphe code. Bye-bye.
That's a nappy-headed hose there, I'm going to tell you that now.